Nobody could explain it later. 1 minute Seren was on her blanket, elephant in her fist, fairy lights blinking above her head, while her mother folded linens 5 feet away and hummed something old and warm. Nia had been playing with her, blowing raspberries on her stomach, watching her hiccup laugh with her whole body until the sound of it filled the small warm room like sunlight fills a jar. 5 minutes. That was all it was. Nia turned to sort the linen shelf for 5 minutes. 5 minutes was all Seren needed, because somewhere in those 5 minutes she had spotted something through the gap of an unlatched door at the end of the corridor, a thin strip of gold light running along the cold marble floor like an invitation. And nobody had ever taught her that some lights in this world are not meant for her. So she followed it. And now she was sitting in the center of the most dangerous room in Seoul, surrounded by 4 men who hadn't breathed in 30 seconds, looking directly at Kang Joon-ho like she had been searching for him specifically and was quietly satisfied to have finally arrived. The meeting had been running 40 minutes. 18 billion won, sitting in the air between 4 men at a marble table in the hills of Seongbuk-dong. Every person in that room understood that the wrong word, the wrong movement, carried consequences that went far beyond the financial. Joon-ho sat at the head of the table the way he sat everywhere, like the room had been built around him, like gravity tilted slightly in his direction. 36 years old, never raised his voice in a professional setting since he was 22 because he had learned early that the quieter he became, the more dangerous the room got. Park Sung-jin stood at the door like a piece of architecture. 15 years of service. The one rule tonight was simple. Nobody enters. No exceptions. Then Seren crawled through the door with her elephant and rearranged everything. The conversation stopped. Not gradually. Immediately. Like someone cut a wire. Seren sat up and looked around, assessed the room with the calm authority of someone who has never been told she doesn't belong anywhere. Expensive suits, marble floors, documents she had absolutely no interest in. And then, across the table, him. She looked directly at Joon-ho and smiled, the full-body smile, the kind that took over her whole face and both shoulders and made the elephant in her fist wave slightly from the enthusiasm of it. Joon-ho looked at her. One of the men across the table shifted almost imperceptibly toward his jacket. Sung-jin's hand came up from the doorway. Slow, deliberate. Don't. The room waited. Joon-ho pushed his chair back and stood. He walked around the table and crouched down to the floor in his expensive suit and looked at this baby who had crawled uninvited into an 18 billion won meeting and was smiling at him like he was the most interesting thing she had ever encountered. Seren crawled to him immediately, grabbed his trouser leg, used it to haul herself upright, wobbling, triumphant, absolutely delighted with herself. Then she lifted both arms. That universal gesture that needs no language, no translation, no words at all. Just 2 small hands reaching upward at the one person in the room she had decided she wanted. Joon-ho looked at his hands. Just for a second. These hands had held things that would make ordinary men lose sleep. They had signed documents that changed the shape of neighborhoods. They had never once held anything that looked up at him the way this baby was looking at him right now. With complete trust, zero history, and no concept whatsoever of who he was or what he had done. He picked her up, awkwardly, carefully, like a man assembling something without instructions who is terrified of breaking it. Seren grabbed his tie and examined it with furrowed brow and pursed lips. Her little professor face, Nia called it. Then she put both small warm hands on his face and held it, and looked at him. The way babies look before the world teaches them to look away, direct, complete, without any agenda at all, like she was reading him by touch and finding something worth staying for. Joon-ho went absolutely still. Sung-jin at the door had forgotten how to breathe. "Gentlemen," Joon-ho said quietly, Seren's hands still framing his face. "We'll reschedule." Nobody argued. Nobody had ever seen this man's face look like that, and every single person in that room made a private decision not to be the one who complicated it. Before we go any further, if you have ever watched a story on this channel and felt something unexpected crack open in your chest, you already know this one is going to cost you something. So go ahead right now and subscribe. Hit that bell. We tell stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. Now let's get back to Seren, because her mother just realized she was gone. Nia found the boiler room empty and felt the floor drop out of her world. She ran, not elegantly, not quietly. Through the corridor she had memorized in 4 months of careful invisibility, every turn, every staff entrance, every room she was allowed and every room she was not. She followed the absence of her daughter like a wound, rounding the corner toward the meeting wing, the wing she had been explicitly told never to approach during business hours. And she saw the door standing open and her heart stopped mid-beat. She walked in. Joon-ho was standing in the emptied room holding Seren. The other men were gone. Seren had her head on his shoulder and was examining the collar of his jacket with the focused interest of a tiny scientist. Nia's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a full 3 seconds. "I'm so sorry," she said finally in the broken mixture of Korean and English that panic always produced in her. "She was right beside me. I turned for 1 minute. Please, she doesn't understand. She doesn't know." "Did I say anything?" Joon-ho said. Quiet. Always quiet. She had worked in this house 4 months and never once heard him raise his voice, and somehow that made it more alarming, not less. "I'll pack our things." "Did I say that either?" Silence. Seren, on his shoulder, found a loose thread on his collar and pulled it thoughtfully. "She belongs to you," he said. Not quite a question. "Yes." Fierce. Absolute. Whatever else in Nia Burns' life was uncertain, that single word never was. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had no map for. "Come to my office," he said, "after she's settled." He handed Seren back. His hands stayed in the transfer 1 beat longer than necessary. Not deliberately, she thought. Just reluctantly. Like something was being taken from him that he hadn't expected to want back. He walked out. Nia stood in the emptied room holding Seren, shaking from her knees upward, while Seren patted her mother's cheek with one small hand, the way she always did when she sensed something was wrong. "I'm here, Mama. I'm right here." The office door was already open when Nia got there. She stood in the doorway for a moment with Seren settled on Ramona's hip down the corridor, her hands folded in front of her face arranged into the careful, neutral expression she had spent years perfecting. The expression that said, "I am calm. I am fine. There is nothing behind this face worth looking at." Joon-ho didn't look up when she entered. He was reading a document, one hand flat on the desk, completely still the way certain dangerous things are still. Not resting. Just waiting. She sat in the chair across from him and placed her hands in her lap and waited too. He finished the document, set it aside, folded his hands. Then he looked at her. "You've been here 4 months, he said. "Yes." "You take the 6:15 bus from Hapjeong Station every morning?" It wasn't a question. Nia felt something cold move through her chest. "Yes." "You haven't taken a single day off since you arrived?" "I don't need—" "You eat after everyone else has eaten," he continued in the same quiet, unhurried voice. "Always in the east corridor, never the staff kitchen." Her hands were very still in her lap. She made sure of it. "You leave through the service entrance even on your half days." He tilted his head slightly, the smallest movement. "Even when the main gate is considerably closer?" The room held its silence like it was used to holding things. "You know this building," he said, like someone who has memorized every exit. Nia looked at him and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Every single thing he had just described was true, and they both knew it, and the fact that he had been watching closely enough to know it, cataloguing her patterns, her routes, her habits, should have terrified her. It did terrify her. But underneath the terror was something else she didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt almost like being seen, really seen. For the first time in longer than she could remember, by someone who wasn't looking at her in order to use what they found. "Your work is excellent," he said. "Your Korean is better than you let people believe." Her jaw tightened slightly. He caught it. "Your position is unchanged," he said. "That's all." She stood, smoothed her uniform, moved toward the door. "Ms. Burns." She turned. He was looking at her with that expression she had no map for. Unreadable but not empty. The opposite of empty. "The room behind the boiler," he said. "The lamp I had installed. Is the light warm enough?" The floor moved under her feet, not the threatening kind of moving, the kind that happens when something you have been bracing against turns out not to be what you thought it was. "Yes," she said. Yes. Thank you." He nodded once and returned to his papers. She walked out into the corridor and stood with her back against the wall and her eyes on the ceiling for a long moment. Her heart was doing something complicated. She pressed one hand flat against her sternum like she could slow it down manually. Down the corridor, Seren saw her mother's face and immediately reached for her. Both arms. That gesture that meant you. Now. I choose you. And Nia took her and held her close and breathed in the warm, powdery smell of her and tried to reorganize the world back into something she recognized. It didn't quite work. The cherry trees outside had started letting go. Nia had noticed because Seren had discovered the window, specifically the pink blossoms drifting past the glass. And now, every time they passed the east corridor window, she reached for it with both hands, grabbing at petals that were always on the wrong side, laughing when they escaped her, reaching again immediately, never frustrated, never giving up. Nia watched her do this and thought, she gets that from somewhere. That certainty that the thing she's reaching for is worth reaching for. She wasn't sure she had ever had that herself. Ramona appeared beside her with 2 cups of tea and the expression of a woman who has seen everything and judges nothing. "She's changing fast," Ramona said, watching Seren assault the window. "Every day something new," Nia said. Ramona handed her the tea. "Not just her." Nia looked at her. Ramona looked back with serene innocence and sipped her tea and said nothing else. It was the sound that started it. Joon-ho was walking the west corridor toward an evening meeting, suit jacket, documents under one arm, Sung-jin 2 steps behind, when he passed an open doorway and stopped walking without deciding to. Inside, Nia had Seren on her back on the floor and was blowing raspberries on her stomach, and Seren was doing that thing, the hiccup laugh, the one that ambushed her every time like joy was a surprise she never got used to no matter how many times it arrived. Her whole body involved in it, her elephant flying. The sound moved through the corridor and into Joon-ho's chest and found something there that hadn't been touched in a very long time. This house had held negotiations, tensions, the specific weighted silence of men making decisions over other men's lives. What it had never held, what Joon-ho realized in this moment it had never once held in all the years he had owned it, was this particular quality of sound, uncalculated and unperformed and completely free. He stood in the corridor and listened until it felt inappropriate to keep standing there. He walked on, said nothing to Sung-jin. Sung-jin said nothing back. But he had seen his employer's face in that doorway, and he filed it away in the part of his mind reserved for significant things. That evening, Joon-ho sat at his desk for 20 minutes after his meeting ended and did not read the documents in front of him. He sat and listened to the sounds the house made and found himself identifying them differently than he used to. The particular creak of the east corridor floor, the distant musical sound of Ramona humming in the kitchen. And underneath it all, if he was very still, the soft, indistinct sound of Nia's voice talking to Seren in the low, warm tone that meant she thought nobody could hear. He had started leaving his office door slightly open. He told himself it was for ventilation. Then one evening, Seren escaped again. Nia had turned her back for the length of a breath. Bath time, warm water, Seren slippery and delighted and faster than physics seemed to allow. And then she was gone. Again, with the specific determination of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Joon-ho heard the crawling before he saw her. He recognized it now, the rhythm of it, the particular purposeful sound of Seren in motion. She appeared in his doorway damp and triumphant in just her onesie, elephant in one fist, hair in wild, wet tufts, looking at him with the expression of someone who has completed a difficult journey and arrived exactly where they meant to. He was already moving toward her before he realized he was moving. He picked her up with his hands, finding the right places now, the muscle memory of it surprising him. When had that happened? And sat her on the desk. She went immediately for his pen. He gave it to her. Watched her professor face activate, brow down, lips pursed, the pen rotating in her small hands with complete scientific focus. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when the right people are in them. "My mother used to hold my face the way you do," he said in Korean, quietly, to no one, or to her. Which was almost the same thing because she was 8 months old and couldn't repeat it, and sometimes you needed to say a true thing to someone who couldn't use it against you. I forgot that. Until you. Seren waved the pen agreeably. "She always smelled like something warm," he said. "I don't remember what it was anymore. I've been trying to remember for 27 years. "She's always known she's safe," Nia said softly from the doorway. "I made sure of that." He looked up. She was leaning against the doorframe in the dim corridor light, Seren's bath towel over one shoulder, watching him with an expression he had never seen directed at him before. Not pity. Something gentler than pity and more complicated. He didn't reach for his professional distance. That surprised him too. "She has no fear of anything," he said. "None," Nia said. She got that honestly. A beat. "I used to be like that. Before." The word before sat between them, and they both understood what it contained without either of them opening it. "What changed?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. The guarded Nia, the careful Nia, the Nia who had memorized every exit, that version of her almost answered with something deflecting and safe. But Seren chose that moment to look back and forth between the two of them with her professor face like she was evaluating the quality of their communication and finding it lacking. Nia almost smiled. Almost. "I let someone convince me that careful was the same thing as safe," she said. "It took me 4 years to understand they aren't." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "They aren't." Seren dropped the pen off the edge of the desk and watched it fall with an expression of pure scientific satisfaction. Then she lifted both arms at Nia, making the urgent babbling sound that meant she had completed her business here and was ready to be collected. Nia crossed the room and took her. And in the crossing, the small geography of 3 steps across his office, something shifted in the air between them that neither acknowledged and neither forgot. Sung-jin found Joon-ho's calendar the next morning. 4 non-urgent meetings moved. 2 calls rescheduled to the afternoon. The specific morning hours when the East Corridor was loudest, when Seren's hiccup laugh travelled furthest through the house, left deliberately clear. Sung-jin stood holding the calendar for a long moment. He had served this man for 15 years. He had watched him build something formidable and cold from the ruins of a childhood that had given him nothing soft to work with. He had watched him make decisions that would have broken ordinary men without flinching. He had never once in 15 years seen him rearrange his schedule for anything that didn't have a financial or strategic consequence. He set the calendar down. "Finally," he said quietly to the empty room. Then he straightened his jacket and went back to work. That night, Nia was in the kitchen at an hour when she should have been asleep. Seren was teething and had been crying since midnight in the specific inconsolable way of babies experiencing their first real pain, bewildered by it, betrayed by it. not understanding why the world that had been so reliably warm had suddenly produced this. Nia had tried everything. The cold cloth, the gentle gum massage, the rocking, the walking, the humming of every song she knew, including 3 she had made up on the spot. Nothing. She was standing at the kettle in the dim kitchen, hair wrapped, eyes that had forgotten what sleep felt like when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Not Ramona's footsteps. Different, deliberate. Joon-ho appeared in the kitchen doorway in a plain dark t-shirt and no performance whatsoever. Just a man in the middle of the night who had heard a baby crying through 2 floors of a marble house and followed the sound without examining why. He looked at Nia, at Seren red-faced and hiccuping against her shoulder, at the kettle, at Nia's face, which was the face of someone running on nothing. He crossed the kitchen and held out his hands. "Give her to me." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Nia looked at him. This man in a plain t-shirt at 2 a.m., who looked nothing like the man who sat at the head of that marble table and rescheduled an 18 billion won meeting without explanation. This man whose face in the dim kitchen light was just a face, tired and present and asking for nothing except to help. She gave him Seren. He took her against his shoulder and walked. Not randomly, with direction, a specific route, the long corridor and back. He talked to her the whole way in Korean, low and steady. Not baby talk, but actual conversation. The Han River and the way it looked before dawn, the cherry trees, and where they went in winter, the particular quality of Seoul silence at 3 a.m., when the city was briefly between its own inhale and exhale. Nia stood in the kitchen doorway and listened. Seren's crying slowed, hitched, slowed again, stopped. The silence was extraordinary. Joon-ho came back down the corridor with Seren asleep on his shoulder, one small fist wrapped around his finger even in sleep, holding on the way she always held on, like she already knew. "What did you say to her?" Nia whispered. He looked at the sleeping baby on his shoulder for a moment. "I told her the Han River doesn't sleep either," he said quietly, "that she's in good company." Nia looked at him and felt the last organized layer of her careful wall simply dissolve. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly the way things dissolve when they've been standing against something warm for long enough. She turned back to the kettle before he could see her face. "Chamomile?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Black coffee," he said. She almost said, "I know," caught herself. "Put the coffee on anyway." They sat at the counter in the kitchen's dim light, him with black coffee, her with chamomile, Seren asleep in the carrier between them still holding his finger, and talked in the way people only talk at 2 a.m. when their guards are simply too exhausted to stand their posts any longer. She told him she first came to Seoul at 22, that it was the first place she had ever felt like the version of herself she actually recognized, that when everything collapsed, she hadn't thought about where to go. Her body had just known, had run toward the only coordinates it remembered as safe. He listened the way she hadn't been listened to in years. No fixing, no advice, no waiting for his turn. Just present, completely. He told her his mother left when he was 9, that he used to sit at the top of the stairs in the dark and listen for the sound of the door, that he did this for 5 years before he understood she wasn't coming back, that his father died when he was 14 and the organization swallowed what was left of him before he had a chance to be anything else. "What do you listen for now?" she asked. The kitchen was very quiet. "I stopped," he said. "For a long time I stopped." He looked at Seren asleep between them, at her fist around his finger. "Until recently I stopped." He didn't explain. She didn't ask. The city moved outside the kitchen window, doing what cities do at 2 a.m., breathing slowly, keeping its own counsel, holding its people in the dark. Neither of them moved to leave. The phone call happened on a Tuesday. Nia was in the east corridor folding the afternoon linens with Seren on her blanket beside her, batting her elephant against the floor with the focused repetition of someone conducting an important experiment. The corridor was warm and quiet, and Nia was humming without realizing she was humming. The low, wordless gospel melody that lived in her body, not her mind. And for approximately 11 minutes, everything in her world was exactly the size she could manage. Then, her phone vibrated. She pulled it out automatically, the way you pull out a phone without bracing. Looked at the screen. Atlanta area code. Number she didn't recognize. It took less than a second, less than a breath. But something happened to her face in that fraction of a moment. Not the full shape of fear. She had learned to manage fear so well it barely registered on the surface anymore. Just a flicker, a tightening. Her hand moving to Seren before her mind had issued the instruction, finding her daughter's back, pressing gently. She let it ring out, put the phone back in her pocket, picked up the linens. Her hands were perfectly steady. She had learned that too, how to keep her hands steady while everything underneath them was not. What she didn't know was that Joon-ho was at the far end of the corridor. He had come from a meeting, documents under one arm, intending to take the East Corridor shortcut to his office the way he had been taking it lately. The way he had been taking it since the East Corridor had become the corridor where Seren's hiccup laugh travelled furthest through the house. He had stopped when he saw Nia, not wanting to interrupt, watching her with Seren in the particular unguarded way he had only recently allowed himself to watch things he cared about. He saw her face when the phone screen lit up, just for a second. Just the flicker before the stillness assembled itself. But he saw it, and he saw her hand find Serene before she had thought about finding her. And he saw the way she put the phone away and picked up the linens and made her hands steady by an act of pure, practiced will. He stood in the corridor for a moment after she had turned away. Then he went to find Sung-jin. "The woman in the East Wing," he said. "Find out if anyone is looking for her." Sung-jin didn't ask questions. In 15 years, he had learned that Joon-ho's quiet instructions were the ones that mattered most. He also noted, privately, carefully, the specific quality of stillness in Joon-ho's voice when he gave this particular instruction. Not the professional stillness of a man managing a security concern. Something else. Something Sung-jin had not heard before and recognized immediately as significant. He went to work. What he found arrived on Joon-ho's desk 3 days later in a plain folder. Troy Landis, 34, Atlanta, Georgia. Successful enough professionally to have options and dangerous enough emotionally to have used them. 3 civil complaints filed against him across 4 years. Restraining order applications, all withdrawn before they reached a hearing. Not because they lacked merit. Because the woman filing them always withdrew first. Because that was how this particular kind of man worked. Not with fists. Not with weapons. With patience. With the slow, methodical erosion of a person's reality until they could no longer locate the boundary between what was true and what he had told them was true. With the quiet dismantling of every exit until the person inside stopped looking for one. With the specific cruelty of a man who understood that the most effective prison has no visible walls. Then the last page. A custody filing in a Georgia court, dated 7 months before Seren was born. Joon-ho read that line once, set the page down, read it again. He sat with it for a long time in the silence of his office. He thought about Nia memorizing every exit, about the way she ate after everyone else, always in the East Corridor, never the staff kitchen, about the service entrance on her half-days even when the main gate was closer, about 4 months of a woman making herself so small and so invisible that the air barely registered her presence. He thought about what it costs a person to live like that, what it takes from you, what you have to convince yourself about your own worth in order to sustain that kind of invisibility day after day. He thought about Seren, a custody filing before she took her first breath, before she had a name, before she had done the thing she would one day do: crawl across cold marble toward a strip of gold light without a single moment of hesitation, lift her arms at the most dangerous man in the room, and simply trust that he would catch her. Troy Landis had tried to own Seren before she existed, and here was Seren, 8 months old, elephant in hand, showing the world every single day what it looked like to be completely, effortlessly free of every chain a person like Troy Landis tried to put on people. She had gotten that from somewhere. Joon-ho closed the folder. He thought about 9-year-old Joon-ho at the top of a dark staircase, listening for a door. 5 years he had sat there, 5 years of believing that if he was still enough, quiet enough, good enough, the door would open and she would come back. His mother, her warm hands, the specific safe smell of her that he had been trying to remember for 27 years. The door never opened. At 14, the organization took what was left of him and finished the work his abandonment had started. It built something from the ruins, capable, precise, feared across 3 districts. It taught him that love was the weakest currency and control was the only reliable one. That people left, and the only way to stop them leaving was to hold everything so tightly it had no choice. He had believed that. He had built an entire life on top of that belief. Then Seren crawled into his meeting room and put her small, warm hands on his face and looked at him. Really looked, the way she looked at everything, direct and complete and without any agenda. And something in him that had been locked since he was 9 years old had simply opened. Not because she was a baby, not because she was small or helpless or in need of protection. Because she was proof. Living, hiccup-laughing, elephant-waving proof that a person could still exist in the world with that kind of openness. That the thing he had buried at 9 years old wasn't naive. That he hadn't been wrong to want it. That Seren could crawl through a room full of dangerous men and lift her arms and trust. And be right to trust because her mother had made sure of it. Had gotten on the floor every single day in impossible circumstances and protected something essential in her daughter that the world had never protected in Joon-ho. He thought about Nia's laugh that afternoon in the East sitting room. The real one. The one that lived in her body when she forgot to monitor it. The one that had reached into the corridor and physically stopped him. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by a very particular kind of strength. The kind built from fear. The kind maintained by making sure everyone around you had more to lose than to gain. He knew this strength the way you know the walls of a room you've lived in for 20 years, completely, without having to look at them. He had never once seen what he saw in Nia Burns, a woman with nothing, no money, no legal standing, no protection in a foreign country, hiding her baby in a crime boss's mansion, taking the service entrance every day, keeping her hands steady by pure practiced will, and still getting on the floor every afternoon to teach her daughter to clap, still humming that low, warm melody through the walls of his cold house, still building Seren a world full of fairy lights and chosen toys and photographs taped at floor level so a baby could see her mother's face from anywhere in the room. That was not the absence of fear. That was something else entirely. Something he had no precise word for. Something that made his own carefully constructed strength feel, for the first time, like what it actually was. A substitute. He had gone cold at 14 and called it survival. And here was this woman showing him, without meaning to, without even knowing he was watching, that warmth was not weakness. That it took more strength to stay soft in a hard world than it ever took to simply go hard yourself. She undid him. Not romantically, not at first, just fundamentally. At the level of the beliefs he had built everything else on top of. She crawled under them the way Seren crawled under doors, and she made him look at things he had not looked at in 27 years. He sat in his office with the closed folder on his desk and the Seoul evening outside his window and understood something quietly and completely. He was not going to let Troy Landis anywhere near them. Not out of strategy, not out of obligation. Not because it was useful or because it served any interest he could name professionally. Because Seren had been raised to know she was safe, and she deserved to go on knowing it. Because Nia had run across the world to find the version of herself she recognized, and she deserved to find her. And because 9-year-old Joon-ho at the top of the stairs had waited for someone to come back for a very long time. He understood now that he had spent 27 years waiting at the top of those stairs. He was done waiting. He found her the next evening in the east sitting room. Seren was in her lap, and they were deep in the serious business of learning to clap. Nia demonstrating slowly, Seren watching with her professor face fully deployed, the concentration of a small person attempting something that matters. Then Seren's hands met, and she felt the sensation of them connecting, and the expression that crossed her face was so purely, completely joyful that Nia laughed, the real laugh, the body laugh, the one that filled the room. Joon-ho stood in the doorway and watched. He watched Nia on the floor with her daughter, and he thought about everything the folder had told him and everything it hadn't needed to say. He thought about Troy Landis moving methodically through 3 districts of his city, asking questions with the patience of a man who had never once failed to find what he was looking for. He thought, not this time. Seren looked up and saw him, and her whole face transformed, the full-body smile igniting from somewhere around her toes. And she clapped both hands together with her whole body involved in each clap, babbling at him loudly and urgently as though she had been waiting specifically for him to arrive and witness this. He crossed the room and crouched down and held up one hand. She clapped it with her whole body involved in the effort. Nia watched this, and something moved through her chest that she recognized as dangerous. The good kind of dangerous. The kind that meant something was growing in soil that had been empty for a long time. Nia, he said. First time. Not Ms. Burns, just her name. In his voice. She felt it land differently than she expected. She looked at him. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide anything. The open expression on her face shifted, braced, but she didn't look away. He's here, she said. Not a question. Her body had known since the Atlanta area code. Yes, he said. The room held its silence. Seren looked between them with her professor face, reading the air, her small hands still. How long? Nia asked. Long enough to understand what we're dealing with, he said. I should have told you sooner. That's true, and I'm not going to argue otherwise. The directness of it knocked the defensive words out of her hands before she could assemble them. Troy had never once in 4 years said I was wrong without immediately explaining why he wasn't. She breathed. Seren put her hand on her mother's knee. I'm here. Tell me everything, Nia said. He sat on the floor across from her, Kang Joon-ho, the man who controlled 3 districts of this city, sitting cross-legged on the floor, and told her everything. The file, the 3 withdrawn restraining orders, the local contact, the Korean lawyer, the custody filing dated before Seren's first breath. Nia listened without expression, with the stillness she had learned. But her hand stayed on Seren the whole time, grounded, anchored. Here. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. He filed before she was born, she said. Yes. He has never held her, she said. He doesn't want her. He wants to own something I have. That's all this ever was. I know, Joon-ho said. You can't know. I know what it looks like, he said quietly, when someone uses ownership as a substitute for love. A beat. I grew up watching it. The room absorbed that. Nia looked at him, really looked, the way Seren looked at things, and saw something in his face she recognized. Not pity, not strategy, just a man telling the truth about something that cost him something to tell. What did you do with his local contact? She asked. No longer available to him, Joon-ho said. The lawyer? Will have a significantly adjusted understanding of his prospects in Korean jurisdiction by end of week. She absorbed this. You did all of that already? Yes. Without telling me? Yes. He held her gaze. I already told you that was wrong. She looked at him for a long time. The version of her that Troy had built catalogued this. Another man making decisions about her life without her permission. Another man who thought protection meant control. That version of her had a response ready. But the Nia who had come back to Seoul to find herself. The Nia who had watched this man sit cross-legged on a kitchen floor and talk to her daughter about the Han River at 3 a.m. The Nia whose name sounded different in his voice than it had sounded anywhere else. That Nia looked at Kang Joon-ho and made a decision. When he comes, she said, and he will come. I want to be there. Nia, I have been running from him for over a year, she said. Her voice was steady, completely steady, not the performed steadiness, the real kind. I'm done running. She looked down at Seren, who was looking back up at her with calm, dark eyes. She needs to see her mother stand still. Joon-ho looked at her for a long moment. At this woman who had crossed the world to find herself and was sitting on his floor with her daughter in her lap, telling him she was done running with the quiet certainty of someone who has finally, completely, arrived at themselves. He thought about Seren crawling across cold marble toward a strip of gold light. He thought, she gets that from somewhere. Then we stand still together, he said. He came on a Thursday morning. Nia knew before she saw him, the way you know certain things in your body before your eyes confirm them. A shift in the air, a change in the quality of the silence, something that moved through the house like a current and found her in the east corridor where she was sitting on the floor with Seren, working on the serious business of stacking soft blocks. Seren would stack one, consider it with her professor face fully deployed, stack another. The third would make the tower fall, and the falling was apparently the best part because she squealed every single time with the full-body delight of someone for whom this outcome was both inevitable and endlessly wonderful. She would then look at Nia with an expression that needed no translation. Did you see that? Did you see what just happened? And Nia would laugh and reset the blocks, and the whole glorious experiment would begin again. Nia was watching her do this, really watching, the kind of watching that fills you up from the inside. When Sung-jin appeared in the corridor doorway, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. In the weeks since Nia had become a fixed presence in this house, she had learned to read Sung-jin's face the way she read weather. Not the words, the atmosphere. And right now the atmosphere said one thing clearly. Nia looked at him, picked up Seren. Stood. Seren looked at the unfinished tower of blocks on the floor with an expression of profound professional disappointment. Then she looked at her mother's face and read it the way she read everything, directly, completely, without flinching, and tucked herself quietly against Nia's shoulder. Joon-ho was already at the gate. He had known since 7 a.m. Sung-jin's quiet knock, the brief exchange, the information delivered and received with the stillness that Sung-jin had learned over 15 years to recognize as Joon-ho's most serious register. He had finished his coffee, straightened his jacket, and walked to the gate with the unhurried precision of a man who had already decided exactly how this would go. Troy Landis stood on the other side of the iron gate in a well-cut coat with a folder under one arm and the particular composure of a man who had prepared for this the way he prepared for everything. Thoroughly, methodically, with complete confidence in the outcome. He was put together in the way certain controlled people are put together. Every detail deliberate, nothing accidental, a face that knew exactly what it was doing at all times. He looked at Joon-ho through the gate and recalibrated immediately. This was not what he had expected, but he recovered fast, smooth, practiced. I'm here to see Nia Burns, he said in English. And my daughter. Ms. Burns does not wish to see you, Joon-ho said in English. Perfectly, without accent. which told Troy several things at once about the man standing on the other side of this gate. Troy's composure flickered, just slightly, just for a second, then reassembled. "I have legal documentation," he said. He opened the folder, held up the papers with the practiced gesture of a man who had used paperwork as a weapon before and found it reliable. "Custody filing. Filed in Fulton County, Georgia. I have paternal rights that extend—" "You have a filing in a Georgia court," Joon-ho said, "which has no jurisdiction in the Republic of Korea. Your Korean lawyer, if he is competent, has already explained this to you." Something moved across Troy's face, controlled quickly. "I just want to see them," he said. Softer now. Reasonable. The gear change was smooth. Joon-ho could hear it, the shift toward the tone designed to make him sound like the most sensible person in the conversation. "That's all. Just to see my daughter. Surely that's not an unreasonable—" "Your daughter," Joon-ho said quietly, "has never met you." Troy's jaw tightened. "That's not my—" "You filed for custody before she was born," Joon-ho said. Same quiet voice, same complete stillness. "Before she had a name, before she had taken a single breath. You did that not because you wanted a child, but because you needed to own something her mother had." The words landed in the space between them, and Troy went very still. "You don't know anything about—" "I know what the file says," Joon-ho said. "I know what 3 withdrawn restraining order applications say. I know what 4 years of a woman memorizing every exit in every building she lives in says," the smallest tilt of his head. "I am familiar with men who use paperwork and patience as substitutes for cruder methods. In some ways, I find them more troubling." Troy looked at him for a long moment. The composure was intact, but it was costing him now. The specific effort of a man who is used to being the most controlled person in any room, finding himself across from someone who made his control look like an early draft. He tried the lawyer angle, the international family court options he had researched over months, the legitimate paternal rights argument assembled carefully and presented now with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it until it felt like truth. Joon-ho listened to all of it without interrupting, without moving, without changing a single thing about his expression. Then he said, "Your local contact is no longer operating in this city. Your lawyer received documentation from my legal team yesterday that has significantly adjusted his understanding of your realistic prospects. If you return to this address, you will be removed. If you continue making inquiries about Ms. Burns or her daughter anywhere in this city, I will make Seoul very uncomfortable for you in ways that have nothing to do with lawyers or paperwork. Quiet, unhurried, completely without theatre." Which was precisely why it landed the way it did. Troy's composure was still there, but barely. Something real was pushing through the surface of it now, not grief, something harder than grief, something that had always been more about ownership than love, and was only now becoming fully visible. "She can't hide behind you forever," he said. "She belongs—" "Choose your next word carefully," Joon-ho said. Troy stopped. The gate held its silence. Then from behind Joon-ho, from the direction of the house, from the doorway where she had been standing long enough to hear almost everything, came Nia's voice. "Tell me yourself." Troy looked past Joon-ho and found her. Nia stood in the mansion doorway with Seren on her hip, and the particular stillness of a woman who has made a decision she is not going back on. She had dressed carefully this morning. Not for him, never again for him. For herself. The version of herself she had been rebuilding piece by piece in this city. Hair natural and loose the way it had been getting progressively looser over these months without her consciously deciding it. Back straight, chin level, eyes on him directly. She looked like someone who had been running for a long time and had simply stopped. Troy's face when he saw Seren did something complicated. Joon-ho watched it carefully from his position between them. There was something in it that wasn't entirely performance. A flicker of something genuine, something that had more layers than the file suggested. which was in some ways harder than if it had been entirely cold, because it meant this wasn't simple. It never was. But Seren looked at this stranger standing at the gate, this man her mother had gone quiet and straight around, and did what 8-month-old bodies do when something in the air is wrong before the mind has words for wrong. She turned her face into Nia's neck, buried herself completely. One small fist gripping her mother's collar with the focused grip of someone anchoring themselves to the one thing they were completely certain of. She did not reach toward him. She did not babble at him. She made no sound at all. She simply turned away. Troy saw it. Something shifted in his expression, fast, controlled, but not fast enough. "Nia," he said. His voice was different now, the professional composure thinning at the edges, something rawer pushing through underneath. I have rights here. She's my daughter too." "You don't know her," Nia said. Her voice was completely steady, not performed steadiness. The real kind, the kind that comes from the other side of a decision already made. "You filed for her before she existed because I left, and you needed something to hold over me. That's not fatherhood, Troy. That's just another way of keeping a door shut. That's not what... I spent 4 years," she said, "learning how to make myself small enough to fit inside the life you decided I should have." Seren shifted against her shoulder, one eye appearing briefly from the sanctuary of Nia's neck to assess the gate, and then disappearing again. "I'm done being small." She has never been small, I made sure of that. And she is never going to learn how to be. Troy looked at Seren, at Nia, at Joon-ho standing between them, like something that had been built specifically for this purpose. The folder in his hand felt different now than it had when he arrived. Lighter somehow, less reliable. A weapon that had already been quietly dismantled while he was still deciding whether to use it. "I'll get legal access," he said, the smoothness reassembling itself because it was the last tool he had. "International family law is not as simple as, 'Speak to your lawyer,'" Joon-ho said, "about the realistic prospects, before you spend more of your time in this city." Troy looked at the three of them standing in that doorway, at the specific quality of the space between Nia and Joon-ho, the way they stood, the way Seren had reached for Joon-ho's collar now with one small fist, while keeping her face buried in Nia's neck, holding both of them simultaneously without effort. And he understood something. He had come to Seoul to retrieve something. What he found was something that had already become something else entirely. Something complete. Something that had no space in it for him. Not because it was hostile, but because it was simply whole. The way a healed thing has no room for the wound anymore. His folder hung at his side. He looked at Nia one last time. Something moved through his face. Complicated, human, more than the story needed him to be, but there it was. He was not a monster. He was something more ordinary than a monster and in some ways more difficult. A man who had confused possession with love for so long he no longer knew the difference. "I'll find another way," he said quietly. "There is no other way," Nia said. "Not here." Troy looked at Joon-ho. Joon-ho said nothing. He had said everything that needed saying. He simply stood in the morning light with the complete stillness of a man who has already decided how this ends and is waiting with infinite patience for the other person to accept it. Troy turned, walked back to his car, the sound of the engine starting, the sound of it moving down the private road lined with cherry trees, the sound of it becoming distant. Gone. Nobody moved until the silence was complete. Joon-ho turned. Nia was still in the doorway. The composure she had held through every second of that confrontation was beginning now, slowly, at the edges, to release. Not collapse. Just release. The specific unwinding of something that has been held very tightly for a very long time. Seren lifted her head from Nia's neck, looked at the empty gate with her professor face, looked at the cherry trees, looked at Joon-ho. Then she reached both arms toward him. The gesture she always made, the one she had been making since the first day she crawled across cold marble toward a strip of gold light and found him crouching on the other side of it. The gesture that needed no words and had never needed any. The one that simply meant, you. I choose you. I have always chosen you. Joon-ho crossed the distance and took her. His hand found Nia's at the same moment, not deliberately, just the way you find in the dark something you already know the shape of. Neither of them looked down at their joined hands. Neither of them moved away. Seren settled against his chest and looked out at the cherry trees with the satisfied expression of someone who has arrived exactly where they meant to be. She reached one hand toward the blossoms drifting past, in the morning air, grabbing at things on the wrong side of the air the way she always did, laughing softly when they escaped her, reaching again immediately. Never frustrated, never giving up, completely certain the thing she was reaching for was worth reaching for. Nia watched her daughter and exhaled, not dramatically, not a collapse, just the specific release of breath that happens when something you have been carrying for a very long time is finally, quietly, set down. He'll try again, she said. Perhaps, Joon-ho said, and we'll be here. We, she said, the word quiet in her mouth, careful, testing the weight of it like Seren tested her blocks, stacking it gently, waiting to see if it held. He looked at her. If you'll allow it, he said. Nia looked at this man holding her daughter in the morning light, this complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly tender man who had made her daughter's hiding place warm without a word, who had learned her coffee order without being told, who had sat cross-legged on her floor and told her true things about himself that cost him something, who had stood at a gate this morning and spoken about her life with more accuracy and more care than anyone had in 4 years. She thought about 22-year-old Nia, stepping off a plane in Seoul with one carry-on suitcase, and the specific lightness of someone running toward themselves for the very first time. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had been finding piece by piece in these marble corridors. She thought about Seren, her star, her fearless one, who had crawled across cold marble toward a strip of gold light without a single moment of hesitation and found exactly what she was looking for. My name, Nia said quietly. Do you know what it means? He looked at her. No. Purpose, she said. It means purpose. Something moved through his expression, deep and slow and permanent, the way things move at the bottom of very still water. You came back to Seoul to find it, he said. She looked at Seren on his chest, her daughter reaching for cherry blossoms on the wrong side of the air, laughing every time they escaped, reaching again, always reaching, and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized after a long absence. Herself. Fully. Finally. I think, Nia said softly. I already found it. They went before the city woke up. It was Joon-ho's idea, though he didn't frame it as an idea. He simply appeared in the east corridor before dawn in a plain jacket and said, Come, and Nia looked at him for a moment and then went to get Seren without asking where or why. That was new. That was something that had happened so gradually she hadn't noticed it happening. The replacement of her constant internal question, what does he want from this, with something quieter and more settled? She just trusted him. She wasn't sure exactly when that had happened. She suspected it had been happening for a long time before she let herself know it. Seoul before dawn was a different city. Not the Seoul of daylight, the loud, layered, brilliant city that had received her at 22 with open, indifferent arms. This was the city underneath that city. Quieter, more honest. The Han River in the early dark moving with the slow purpose of something that has been moving since before the city existed and will keep moving long after, indifferent to everything built along its banks and somehow comforting for exactly that reason. Joon-ho drove. Nia sat beside him with Seren, in the carrier against her chest. Already drowsy, her professor face relaxed into the soft, open expression of a baby on the edge of sleep. The city moved past the windows in fragments of light and dark, And Nia watched it and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she had almost forgotten it had a name. Peace. Just peace. The simple, undramatic version of it. The kind that doesn't announce itself. They parked and walked to the river's edge and stood there in the early grey light, with the water moving in front of them and the city beginning its slow exhale behind them, and nobody said anything for a long time because nothing needed to be said yet. Seren woke gradually, the way she always woke, incrementally, her professor face assembling itself piece by piece as consciousness returned. She looked at the river with the focused attention she gave to everything new, reached toward it with both hands. The water was on the wrong side of the air, just like the cherry blossoms always were, and she grabbed at it anyway, because she had never once let the impossibility of a thing stop her from reaching for it. Joon-ho watched her reach. He thought about everything that had led to this specific moment, the meeting room, the cold marble, a strip of gold light under a door. A baby who followed light without asking whether she was allowed to. A woman who had run across the world toward the coordinates her body remembered as safe. A man who had been sitting at the top of a dark staircase for 27 years, waiting for a door that was never going to open. He thought about how none of it had been planned, how none of it had been strategic, how it had arrived the way the most important things always arrived. Sideways, unexpected, through a door that wasn't fully latched. "Inyon," he said quietly. Nia turned to look at him. "Fated connection," she said. "You know it. I learned it the first time I lived here," she said. "I thought I understood it then." She looked at Seren reaching for the river with both hands, absolutely certain the water would eventually cooperate. "I didn't." He looked at her. The grey dawn light on her face, her hair loose and natural the way it had been getting for months. The loosening that had happened so gradually, neither of them had announced it, but both of them had noticed. The version of herself she had been finding piece by piece in his corridors, assembled now, present, completely here. "Your name," he said. "Purpose." "Yes. You came back to Seoul to find it." She was quiet for a moment. The river moved. Seren babbled at it softly, a conversation she was having with the water, patient and one-sided and completely confident that the water was listening. "I used to sit in Atlanta," Nia said, "and try to remember what it felt like to be here, to be myself. I would close my eyes and try to find it, and it kept getting further away." She paused. "I don't have to try anymore." He reached over and tucked a curl behind her ear. "Carefully. The way you touch something you understand the value of." She didn't move away. She turned her face slightly toward his hand, the way Seren turned toward warmth, instinctive, honest, without performance. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "I want to be honest about that. I know how to run things. I know how to hold things together by force. I don't know how to—" He paused, looking for the word. "This. Neither do I," Nia said. "Not anymore. Maybe not ever." "Then we figure it out," he said. She looked at him, at this man who had rebuilt her daughter's hiding place without a word, who had sat cross-legged on her floor, who had faced down her past in a morning gateway with the quiet immovability of something that had decided and was done deciding. "Joon-ho," she said. He waited. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing us. Before we knew we needed to be seen." Something moved through his face, deep and slow. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the river. At Seren's hand wrapped around his finger in the carrier, holding on even now, even here, the way she always held on. "She crawled across a room full of reasons to be afraid," he said finally, and lifted her arms at the most dangerous thing in it. He looked at Nia. "She gets that from somewhere." Nia understood he didn't mean it as a compliment about Seren. The city woke up around them in increments, light arriving slowly across the water, the first sounds of traffic somewhere behind them, Seoul reassembling itself into its daytime self. But here at the river's edge, the three of them stayed in the last of the quiet, unhurried, held by the specific piece of people who have found something they stopped believing they would find. Seren stopped reaching for the water. She looked at Joon-ho, then at Nia. Then back at Joon-ho with her professor face, that final assessment, that careful evaluation. Then she tucked her head against his chest, closed her eyes, and slept. And Nia watched her daughter choose him in her sleep the way she had been choosing him from the very beginning. Without words, without conditions, with the complete and simple certainty of someone who has never been taught to be afraid. And she thought, neither have I. Not anymore. If this story found something in you that needed finding, if Nia and Seren and Joon-ho gave you something today, then this channel is where you belong. Subscribe. Leave a comment telling us which moment got you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that healing finds you in the most unexpected places. We'll see you in the next story. Inyon. Some connections are not made, they are remembered.